Shirley Anne, thank you so much for being here for part 2. I think it's really important for people to get to know your work a little bit more, but also your personal journey that has turned from personal experience into professional experience. And we'll focus on that in today's episode. But first, please reintroduce yourself to folks.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Shirley Anne Off. In my day job, I'm the Director General of Communications at the Department of Justice Canada. And I'm a mother of 2 awesome kids, have a great partner, try my level best every day to make a difference on top of getting all the work done. And really, really happy to be here. It's really an honor to share what I've been able to learn and accomplish with others over the years. So this is really exciting. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. I've learned a lot from you, and I've really appreciated our relationship over the last few years, especially since 2020 when we first met. And out of that continued partnership and communication and conversation between the two of us, I realized that your voice was very much needed in our book, The Conscious Communicator, and we're very generous in contributing an article. And the article name is Compassion, Curiosity, Empathy, and Action, Ensuring Our Communications Efforts Respect Vulnerable Audiences. Now, that is not a performative title. That is not, just surfacey, right? That's getting to some heart in there. There's some blood, sweat, and guts in there. So I'd like to understand a little bit more of what was your personal journey like? What were you exposed to? What did you witness? What got you into this work to where you got to a place personally that you're off the sidelines and started demonstrating not only your personal way, but also in your professional experience?
Well, I have to give a nod to just the amazing opportunities I've had at the Department of Justice, and then previously at the Department of Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development, where often people think government is a big brother nanny state sort of situation, or is there to provide certain programs and services. But both of these departments deal with some of Canada's most vulnerable or most marginalized individuals. Here at the Department of Justice, there's all different kinds of approaches to the, managing crime or criminal justice system. But I've been lucky to be working to support an agenda that is about addressing systemic racism and discrimination in the criminal justice system. So that means trying to support, policy that tries to address the very harmful impacts of a justice system that is unfair to Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized people, while still keeping people safe. So it's a complex problem. But for me, I guess I've never been drawn to, the big international files or major service delivery. Your question makes me really think. I like to be working in places where we're helping people and helping people who don't normally maybe get helped. And for me, it's funny, it's my mom's birthday today. She would have been 92 today. She passed away a few years ago. So it's just kind of reminding me, I think a lot comes from, the way I was raised. My parents were both in many ways orphans. My dad was orphaned at the age of 7 during the middle of the Depression. And my mom was raised by a single mom from the age of 6 onward. My grandmother didn't remarry until much, much later in my mom's adult life. And so they both really struggled, but there was never any bitterness. They were also both deeply religious, which is something that I don't share, but the values that they instilled in all of us was really about community and taking care of each other and valuing things that aren't monetary, because we didn't have a lot of those things, and giving back. My dad used to, I'll tell the story quickly, my dad, who's passed away as well. I remember one dinner, he brought home a gentleman from the church who was down on his luck and was struggling, and came into the church when my dad was cleaning up, and my dad said, "Oh, do you need a meal?" And he brought him home, and my mom kind of said, like, "What the heck is this guy doing at my kitchen table? I have young teenage daughters." But my dad was like, "No, like, people deserve a hand." And so in some ways, I'm sure as a 12-year-old, I was kind of like, "Ew, who is this guy doing here?" But that experience also lingers with me. My father treating this man with so much respect, and welcoming him into our home. And then my mom was always active. I used to go on Meals on Wheels with her. I hated it. Like, I hated all of these things when I was a kid, but at the time, but looking back on it, it just showed me how important community is. And I got to see that there were people out there who weren't just like me. There were people who were better off than me, and then there were people who are really suffering. And so you can't go through your life thinking that those people don't exist. So that's probably the core of it. And then came my independent thought and really figuring out what feminism meant to me. What I went to graduate school. I studied feminist cultural politics and feminist cultural studies. Always been fascinated with how women are represented. And then in doing that work, you start to see, well, white women are represented maybe poorly, but wait a second, what's this question of intersectionality, and that being entered into my consciousness, and recognizing and building again on that concept that there's just, everybody isn't like you, right? And that doesn't mean, and that's a good thing. And then how do we work together? How do we do things differently? And then some seminal work experiences for me early on were, I worked as an intercultural outreach worker in a urban center in Toronto, high crime neighborhood, very ethnically diverse neighborhood. And I worked with mainly Jamaican Canadian single moms and the Sikh community to help their children integrate better into the school system and get them supports. So there again, I ended up in people's homes, right? Trying to get kids to come to school or try to figure out what the problem was and why this kid was struggling, or a mom who couldn't make it to meet the teacher because she had to work in the evenings, and, trying to bridge that gap between educators and families. And so I saw a lot there that some of it was really hard to see, but again, community and how important it was to have resources in place. And then I spent 5 years in a part-time job. It was probably the best job of my life ever, working for Planned Parenthood here in Ottawa. And I ran a theater program on healthy sexuality. It was kind of improv and by, for, and about youth. And every year they would go around and tour, and I was able to attract kids from all kinds of walks of life. And if we didn't have those, that's who we brought in to talk to us. So that then when we went out and they talked about, sexual violence in relationships, or they talked about racism, that they heard from people who experienced it if they themselves didn't, and then tried to show respect for that in the shows that they did. And then again, you travel around a community and you see that not all high school students are the same, right? So constantly being reminded, I think, Kim, that society is diverse. It is richer because of it. Every interaction I had made me a more complete person, and helped me be a more compassionate person. Also, people call you on your shit. Can I swear on your show? They call you on your shit, right? When you're off balance, or you're talking on their behalf, and nothing like a strong single mom to tell me why she's not coming into the school why she's not crossing that threshold and the disrespect she may have experienced. So, sort of how do, you can't help but internalize those things. And then I think finally, I guess two other things. I grew up in Northwestern Ontario. I know that my great grandparents got very cheap land that they built a family on. And while my mom and my grandmother may not have been well educated because of that land, which was taken from Indigenous people, I learned over the course of my career and my better understanding of colonialism and Indigenous rights and issues here in Canada, that I benefited from their loss. And while you do struggle with whether or not as a white woman in Canada, even though I was really working class, right? I struggled, with not wanting to feel guilty about that, but wanting to do something about that. So how do you acknowledge your past and the privilege that you have, and then, form the relationships, which I have many, and do the work that I've had the opportunity to do to try to change that relationship between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people in Canada. And so I often introduce myself as someone, especially when I am working with Indigenous people where I grew up and my story, as an acknowledgement of me knowing that I got here because other people weren't allowed to. So, as much as I'd like to say I'm responsible for my own success, we all know that that's not necessarily true. And then finally, I think I would say I'm the mother of a trans woman. My daughter is trans. And let's just say Quinn keeps me on my toes, and I've had to really think about what it means to be a woman, right? Like this debate going on in some feminist circles, and sadly, horrifically, what's going on in the United States. You don't see it quite the same. We don't have legislators doing it in Canada yet. We have the opposite for now. But that hate, it's just like, made me really, if a Black woman can be a woman, how can a trans woman not be a woman? How can a white woman not be a woman? Like, not my job to define what woman is. It's my job, though, to create a community of women. And so, so my daughter Quinn has played a big part in that as well. So, always learning, always changing, keep on your toes. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a long story.
Well,
it's a long story.
It's a rich story, and you're in touch with your story. And I think that's where some of us as communicators can really tap into understanding our motivations of why we see what we see, say what we say, do what we do. If we don't connect to our stories and really name and kind of walk through what our upbringing has been like, what have we been sheltered from, what have we been exposed to, et cetera, that influences the language we use, the breadth of understanding our audience that's receiving our communications. And it helps us keep in mind that other people are having a different experience, which you mentioned over and over again. So getting in touch with our own story is a big part of our growth as DEI communicators. You mentioned the word privilege in there. So I want to ask you a little bit about that. You're a white woman. There is privilege that comes with that. There's advantages that you and I have had from that part of the deal is for us to be oblivious to it. That's kind of how we've been socialized, is to be oblivious to it. And then we walk into stuff all the time that we end up using it as a weapon. And we may or may not know about it. So do you have a story of a time when you really recognized your privilege and what you do with that privilege that you now recognize, whether personally or professionally?
Yeah, I think, I'll go back to sort of my early years. I spent 18 years working at Indigenous Affairs and Northern Development Canada. So there was one meeting I went to, and because I'm from Northwestern Ontario and my hair was very dark back then, I didn't have my COVID gray then. And I I have an olive complexion. I was sitting at a table it was a meeting of a number of Indigenous women leaders, and I was there just to set up the media relations table or whatever it was. And I was sitting at the table during lunch, and one of the First Nation women at the table looked at me, and it's a very common question where she just said, "So, where are you from? What's your community?" And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. And I said, "Oh, I'm from Thunder Bay." She goes, "No. Where are you from? Who are your people?" And I went, oh, no, actually, I'm not. My mom's Ukrainian. My dad's German. I'm not Indigenous. I'm not First Nation. And she just went to me. She goes, "Well, you got dark skin and you got dark hair and you grew up in Thunder Bay. You've probably been treated like you're First Nation." And made me think, one, how generous of her to even afford that to me, recognizing that I wasn't. I did grow up in a particularly, sadly, racist community. It's suffers a lot of problems. But it did make me start to look back at the experiences that I've had. And I don't know whether I agree with her. I don't think I was, but it did trigger that in me about, wow, what did she experience when she was in my hometown because of it, right? And made me think how important it was for me to never, ever let anybody go around thinking that I am Indigenous, and that assumption that can happen or be made. I'm the champion for Indigenous people. I've worked on Indigenous issues, so people often assume, they make assumptions. So for me, it was about, no, I need to make sure that people know I'm an ally here. I do not want to ever give the impression that I am co-opting someone else's experience, even if it might give me a little bit more credibility in a room, to just let people maybe think that. And that was very early on. And then I must admit, when emotions and reactions were very high after the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. We talked about this in our last chat. There's lots of action that's been done across government here, and we talked a bit before about sort of within the bureaucracy. There is a commitment, an anti-racism and anti-discrimination commitment across all departments to take certain action to address discrimination in the workplace. Racism and discrimination in the workplace. And in that, we created in our department a new anti-racism and anti-discrimination secretariat. And new people came in who didn't know me. And we did a formidable job of ensuring that the people that were brought in to work on that weren't white, because we're not a really particularly representative department of employees. And I realized that despite the fact that I think I'm a pretty good person and I've been fighting the good fight and I've been an ally, is that not everybody there trusted me. And at first I'm going to be honest, I was hurt. What do you mean they don't trust me, right? Look at all this stuff that I've done, and I've been in this department for 6 years and blah, 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 blah. And then I went, wait a second, they don't have to trust me. Right? I have to earn their trust. And it's not about me, right? It's about what I can do. And, and there were probably a couple of very uncomfortable conversations where I walked away kind of feeling sorry for myself. And then it's no, first of all, I'm a member of the senior executive of the department. You look at me, I have a master's degree, I have a Bachelor of Education, and I have an honors English degree. I'm in the highest communications position you can get in my department. I have access to all the levers of power. Of course I'm privileged. Of course they don't need to trust me. Of course I need to show them that I can be trusted and prove it through action, not just because, I have a nice bio. So that was also a really good reminder as well. And like I said, my kid keeps me on my toes as well. And, we have, like really, really, really thinking about what it means to be a part of a diverse community where maybe I think I grew up on the edge because I was working class, and maybe it's a big deal that I'm the first one that has a master's degree in my family. And wait, don't you know, my dad only had grade 8 education. You know what? Look where I got despite all of that. So there's a reason for that. And that's because I'm white, and that's because I'm cisgender, and that's because things were easier for me than maybe my Indigenous or Black or colleague who's disabled or has a disability. Things were easier for me. So yeah, I got to move further faster than some of my peers. So yeah, I've got to take responsibility for that or ownership of that, but can't change it. It doesn't mean that I'm not good at my job or that I'm not a good person, but I got to keep proving it if I want to, and I got to keep making the actions. You can't rest on your laurels. If you're going to do that, get out of the way.
And lift all boats. And it's the naming. It's redefining what it means to be white, right? And being empowered by that and in a way that has a lot of humility, but us talking about it openly and building the skills to be able to talk about it. Yeah. This is incredibly important as part of the work. It's not enough to not be racist. For example, we must be anti-racist. And so I've got 2 more questions for you. One is, what's your advice to other white women who are in such a place of power? If we look statistically in corporate communications in the US, it's like in the 80 percentile of folks, of white women, white people, but primarily white women demographically are in these roles, especially the chief communications role, VP role, et cetera. So they're in this place. And while they've experienced sexism, they may not be in touch with their, racial identity and their ethnic identity and what it means in the workplace and what to do about it, how to have the conversation, how to be anti-racist with this place of power. So what kind of advice do you have for other white women who are empowering communications?
Well, one, I think we all need to really think about how we got where we got, right? Like, of course, I still experience sexism in the workplace every once in a while. And if you're still going to experience it, but for me, it is now about, maybe I can just talk about it that way. It is more about, I used to be building my career for me. And now I'm here. Like, I don't really have much further to go in my career, right? So for those of us who are like me, who are like Gen Xers, and, we fought the fight, we got our elbows up, and we made it through the 90s. And here we are at the top of the corporate calendar, the corporate hierarchy. And even though we're leading what used to be like the pink ghetto, like, let's face it, like PR, all of it, we're always kind of fighting for our reputation, for being included in the conversation. You're there. So what are you going to do with that power? Are you still going to just be getting your career going? Or how do you create space for the other voices? So one of the things that I do is I'm the champion for Indigenous people. I do wish there was an Indigenous person at my level who could be at the executive table to represent those interests. There isn't, so I am there. And I am constantly making sure that those issues are being raised, and that when I raise them, they're informed by conversations with Indigenous employees here. Is that part of my job? No, but it's part of my corporate responsibilities. So when I used to focus on building my career, now I'm building my legacy. And what I want to come behind me is a whole bunch of people who don't look like me. I want to create the space for the people who don't look like me and don't think like me, and you can bring a different perspective to the table, because there was a time where that was me, right? People were someone made space for me, and for us. So now I find those places. So you've really got to check your values and be value driven, not career driven. And so that's what I invite other women who are in senior positions to do, is to of course, you're going to continue to do good work. You're going to continue to give your best communications advice. But what is your legacy going to be, right? What is it that Maya Angelou says? It's something to the effect of, people won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you treated them.
How they made you feel. Yeah. How you made them
feel.
Yeah.
Right? How you made them feel. So, am I always good at it? No, because sometimes my job overwhelms my ability the directive to get things done, overwhelms my ability to always be able to be as consultative or as self-reflective as possible. But every opportunity I do have, I'm trying to influence to build an organization that when I leave it will be stronger than when I came, and will be more diverse and more inclusive, and more welcoming, so that those people will stay. So yeah, that's why I talk about building things. Got to build it. Just don't. Yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah, don't maintain, but build, create. And we're in this prime opportunity because everything is shifting right now, shifting in power, shifting in, ideals, perspectives, strengths, talents, skill sets. Everything is shifting right now. And so communicators can really lead this work, which leads me to my last question for you. And that is, what's the risk in the near and or long term with organizations not doing this work, not doing the introspective personal work that we started off this episode with, and then having it show up in the powerful roles that we have, which is what we just talked about there? What is the risk of doing nothing in our organizations, and the risk of
doing nothing?
Yeah, and not communicating like we give a damn.
Well, if you're communicating with and to employees, if that's part of your job, it is part of my job, you risk losing them. You risk losing the very voices you need in order to have evidence-based decision-making, policies that are in the interest of, but also informed by the experiences of the people who live through these policies. You're going to lose talent. They're going to go somewhere else. And then, but most importantly, you're going to, I don't want to, who wants to work someplace where everybody's the same? The ability for that organization to learn and to grow and to adapt is lost when you lose those people, or when you have them and you don't value them, because sometimes people can't leave. There's a lot of reasons why people stay. So on an employee communications side, your credibility is gone. And of course, anything that you communicate needs to have actions behind it. I'm definitely not into the performative part of communications. On D&I stuff, it needs to have concrete policies and plans in place and accountabilities. On an external side, I don't deal with profits and I don't deal with market share, but I do deal with the issue of ensuring that Canadians specifically can have confidence in their criminal justice system. So if we have a criminal justice system that only speaks to a certain class or certain race or age or demographic of people, then there's a whole bunch of people who are going to lose confidence in a system that's supposed to protect all of us and serve all of us. So that's a foundational piece of our democracy, is a functioning justice system, right? So I think it's quite, the the stakes are pretty high if you're not reaching out and representing the voices of all of those people and considering their experiences when you're trying to, for me, explain the kind of policies that we're doing. So it's really about relevance. It's about learning and adaptability. And it's about attracting talent and keeping the confidence of the people that your organization is set out to serve or to meet the needs of.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity of your time and sharing your personal story, the vulnerability that comes along with that. Thank you. Thank you. And I think a lot of us,
you're welcome.
To get to that point, to be as vulnerable and forthcoming, but that's where we do need to get to in order to be able to stand on solid ground and do the solid work that is required of us to lead this work as communicators. Shirley Anne, thank you so much for your time. Any last parting words?
Just really be true to yourself and know what your values are, because they'll guide you, and come back to them. Write them down if you have to. They're your guideposts. And if you really, really believe in this work, you've got to integrate it into the way that you work and into your value system. It's your leadership style, but it's also the core of who you are. And bring your real self to the table. People want to see that. And you can grow, you can make mistakes. Oh my God, I have far too many messages for people. Anyways.
That could be a whole podcast episode right there.
Part 3. No, I'm joking.
Here's the mistakes I made and what I've done to learn through them. Yes, absolutely. So, Shirley Anne, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Thank you for sharing with our audience.
Thanks so much. I love doing it. Thanks for the opportunity, Kim. Take care.
And we'll put together a number of things within the show notes. There's a number of things that Shirley Anne talked about, things that the Canadian government has made commitments to and mandates to around anti-racism, anti-discrimination. And there's a variety of very, very, very interesting policies that we can learn from no matter where we are in the world. There's something to be learned with what Canada is doing in this work in particular. All right. Thank you so much. So what popped out to you from the conversation? The more conscious communicators in the world, the better the world. So go to communicatelikeyougivadamn.podcast.com and set up a one-on-one strategy session. And until next time, let's keep taking care of each other.